Hi, I'm Shari Blaukopf. Welcome to my studio. I'm just back from the market and I picked up these beautiful clementines, and I always like it when I can find the ones that have the leaves on them. So I'm going to sketch those now, and I'm going to show you how I do that in ink and in watercolor. I have these beautiful clementines from the market and I'm going to draw them with a dip pen. This one is a kakimori pen with a brass nib. Really beautiful dip pen. I have 1/8 of a sheet of Fabriano cold press paper. I have a round brush, watercolor brush, and I have this De Atramentis document black ink, which is waterproof permanent ink, which I'm going to dip my pen right into. And I'm going to start drawing. And what I like about this pen is that I can use different kinds of pressure. So if I can put a thick line depending on how I angle it, or a thin line. And so I'm going to think of using a variety of lines in here. And I'm holding the pen pretty loosely. I'm going to draw the leaf first and then figure out where that hits the clementine right here. And I'm going to move my pen around and change the angle and try and get a little bit of the movement in the leaf and then a little bit of the texture on the fruit itself. Now, where is the fruit? It starts somewhere right here, and I'm going to come around, and instead of just looking at it and saying, oh, that's an oval, and I'm just going to draw the oval, instead I'm really looking at the edges, and I'm trying to capture those edges, and they're almost faceted. So I'm looking at the bumps on the texture of the citrus, but also the direction of these pieces. And so when it changes direction, I'm following with my eye and then looking at how that changes direction. And I'm also going to put in a little bit of the texture on the fruit and get a little bit of that movement in there. Just a little bit of the bumps in there. And I'm looking at the color too, and I see that there's some green in there, so I'll have to remember that when I'm painting. Now, where does the next orange go? It fits in somewhere over here. Here's the bottom of it, and it comes up and around. And one side is a little higher than the other, so I'm looking at that, and then I'm bringing it around. And the stem end is somewhere up over here, and I'm going to look at all of this bit of texture. We'll put in a little bit of it, and I'll also use a little splatter when I go to paint. And the one thing that I don't draw is the shapes of the shadows. That's just going to be in watercolor. Now here's the next leaf that's down over here, and it's curled over, so I'll get a little bit of that curl movement. And as you start to draw, I think your hand warms up a little. Here's the third orange. That's going to go right over here. And again, I'm looking at what are the edges and what are those facets and how does it sit on the table. So it sits something like that, and it comes around like this, and here's the stem, and there's one more leaf that starts here. That clementine is in front of the leaf, and the leaf is right on the table, right on that cloth, most of it, and one side comes up a little bit. The leaves are a little bit dry, and I'm trying to get a little bit of that dry texture in there. I'll get a little more ink, and I'll put in the last stem and leaf, which is somewhere in here. And you notice I drew from left to right so that I didn't get my hands in there and smudge the ink because I'm right-handed. And then let's look at the edges. There's a little tear in one of the edges. And this is curling up, drying a little bit. And then I'll get the edge of the stem over here. And then there's a beautiful line of the cloth, and I think I'm going to put that in just back here. There's a little pleat right here in the cloth. Again, I'll try and get a little movement in there. And I'll show that pleat when I put in my watercolor washes. And as soon as I finish drawing this, I will stop and let the ink dry, because it is waterproof ink, but I've put it on quite thickly in some places, and if I touch that with water, that's going to run. So I don't think I want to do that. You can dry it with a dryer, or you can go take a walk, or you can eat another clementine while you're waiting. But just be really certain that it's dry before you put water on it. And the last thing that I'm doing is I'm using up the leftover ink in my pen by just showing where the oranges hit the table. I'm thickening that line at the bottom a little bit, and I'll put a little bit of the citrus texture on here. And you want to have fun with this. You want to just really appreciate the sound of the pen on the paper and that beautiful black ink, and how nice it is to use a beautiful tool like this, a dip pen, a really old-fashioned kind of drawing tool. So nice to work with. And I'll just do a little dark here where this leaf hits the table, and a little darker here where it hits the table, and that's it. Now I'm going to let that dry. So I have some beautiful orange paint here. I have cadmium orange, and I have a little bit of brilliant orange, and I'm going to mix up some wash, a good amount of wash, and in some places I may want to even add a little bit of yellow in there, and in some places I may want to put a little bit of green, and I have some Hooker's green over here on my palette, so I'll get a little bit of that ready over here. I don't want it to be too dark, but I just want to have just a little hint of green on there. So I'll start by just, oh, didn't clean that too well, so let me get a little more clean orange paint over here. And as I'm painting, and as I start to paint, I want to get lots of great color changes in here and make sure that the wash is really wet. So if I see it moving around on the paper, then I know it's good and it's really wet, and I can, having it wet like that also gives me the time to go back and refill my brush with some fresh color and make sure that that all blends together and looks really beautiful. I'm going to pick up a little bit of green and put that in here. And sometimes I also just tap my brush and get a little splatter too. I like to have a little splatter in these drawings. I'm going to take a little bit of red in there. And as it comes down and it's in shadow on the right side, I want it to be a little more deep orange. So what I do is I take the orange that I have and I'll just put a little red in there. And that red is organic vermilion. So I really want the paint to move around, and I can see that the colors are blending on the paper. So let's just get a little more splatter in there. And then I'm going to start on this one with the lighter side. So I'm just cleaning my brush a little, and I'm going to try and leave a few little highlights in here. Also, I'll paint around the leaf and I'll come back and put a little color on that after. And I'm going to take a little of the green in here. And then I'm going to take my deeper red. And look at how all those different colors in there, how they're blending together so beautifully. So this is the shadow side, and the shadow side is that warm color. But I don't want it to be a gray. I want it to be a really beautiful warm. And let's get a little more splatter. Sometimes I just knock it a little bit. And as this starts to dry, that also helps to develop the texture on there. So let's get a little color in there, and then we'll do the third orange. We'll start lighter, and I'll get some highlights on the right, like that. I'll put a little bit of yellow in there, just so that they're not all the same. If you see you have a big puddle of water, you can also pick it up with your brush. Here's another one. I'll take up a little bit of that over there. And then I'm going to come around, and I may even get a little bit of my carmine that I have here and put that in for this side of the orange, just to make it just a little different from the other two. And then come back with some more of the lighter orange. And see how that's running together. And this is still damp over here, so if I want to go back in and while it's damp, put a little color in, I'm going to do that too. Now that it's not too wet, just to give some volume to the form. I like to do this while it's all wet, and I'll pick up a little more color and do a little more splatter around the edges here. That also makes it more interesting on the white surface. And it softens the subject and the background, and it sort of gives them a connection. Having a little bit of that splatter gives them a little connection. And as this starts to dry, if I come in with a little splatter in there, as it dries, I get different kinds of effects. So I'm going to put a little more green on this one, and I just tap it on my finger and get that. I don't want to over splatter it, so I'm going to kind of leave it and just leave those little highlights. And now I'm going to come in and I'm going to do the leaves. So let's mix up. Let's use the same green. I'll take the Hooker's green that I have and a little bit of Hansa yellow. And it's kind of a dull green. These leaves are kind of a dull green. So if I mix in a little of the orange or reddish orange, because it's the complementary color, it's going to dull that green, which is perfect. And that's exactly what I want. And again, with the leaves, I'm going to try and change the color a little bit, mix in a little bit of my cerulean blue. And then I'm going to take a little bit of ultramarine. Where the leaf folds, it gets a little bit dark in here. So even within that small shape, I'm trying to get a good variety of color and value. Let's connect that just a little bit. And I'll wet my brush and just get a little splatter of the green. And then I'm going to go back to the lighter color again for this one. So I'll try and get that same variety. And you don't have to paint right up to the edge of the line. It's nice to have a little offset between the line and the wash. And that's what I'm trying to do. Trying to get some good bright color, lots of variety, but not necessarily painting within the lines. And now I'm going to get a little bit of dark. You have that dark stem. And then I'm going to come back with a little lighter color on the leaf. And if I have too much color on my brush, then I just dab it off. I'm going to have it lighter. So I just wet my brush and dried it a little bit, just so it's not a dark green right up against the fruit. Sometimes I like to splatter before I paint. So we'll put the splatter in first, and then I'll put some color on it. And I'll let that move around in that little puddle. And I like that I have a little bit of the orange in there too, so it connects the colors and the shapes. And I'm going to dry my brush and just pick up a little bit of that and put just a little bit of darker greenish blue as we get close to the orange down at this end. So all of the leaves have variety. I think this is mainly probably dry enough that I can put the blue in over here, and then I think I will let it dry and then put the shadow in. So I'm cleaning my brush. I'm going to try and find a clean little spot on my palette. I'm going to take a little bit of cobalt blue in that one clean spot on my palette. And I'm going to get a lot of water on here and just get that beautiful stripe. And there's a little bit of orange splatter, which is nice. So I've got a tiny bit of orange, and I'll let these stripes fade out. There's a beautiful granulation on the paper too now. And what's nice and what I love about having this blue stripe in there is that it's the complementary color to orange. So it really changes it all as soon as you put a little bit of blue in. And there's a little bit of green. I like when I get these little surprises, little bits of green that go into the blue, or little bits of orange. You can always come back and darken it after, but start with a light touch in the beginning. Okay, I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to come back and put the shadows on the table. This is nice and dry now, and there's lots of beautiful little things that happened in the watercolor, so I'm happy that I integrated a little bit of green, and you don't want it to be too orange, so I got lots of nice color changes in here, both in the leaves and in the oranges. And now I'm going to mix up some shadow color. There's two mixes that I like for shadow. Let's see which works today. One is cerulean blue mixed with a little bit of purple. The cerulean blue granulates beautifully. So let's mix up, there's lots of shadow area, so let's mix up lots of it. I'm going to take a little bit of my purple, and this violet is pretty strong, so I don't want to get too much of it in there. So that's a nice shadow color. And if I find it too purple, sometimes what I do is I just put in a little bit of yellow. The other mix that I like before I test it out is I like to take a little bit of cobalt blue and either a little Quin Rose or a little carmine. That's also a nice color. Look at that. And again, if it's too purple, then I will add a little bit of yellow. Just touch the end of my brush and just get a more neutral color. And that's a shadow mix that is made up of many colors, and as it dries, it's really beautiful. So let's test this. And I really look at the shadow. What's the shape of that? And sometimes you have a hard edge, but sometimes it also softens. So what I do sometimes is just soften the edge of the shadow. There's also the texture of the table. So I'm going to soften the edge of that. And sometimes the shadow also picks up a little color from the object itself. In this case, there is a little bit of orange that I can see in the shadow. So I'm just going to put a little bit of orange in there. And then I'm going to take a little bit more of this. I hope I don't have to mix up more, but if I do, I'll just dip into my colors again, try and get the same mix. And the shadow is darkest at the source, so I try to keep it dark right at the base of the clementine and then lighten it as I come out. And I'm going to soften it again at the edge. And does it connect to the other shadow? Not really. There's a bit of a shadow under here. And here's this orange, it comes out, the shadow comes out something like that. Then I have this leaf, which also has a little shadow on it. And then there's this pleat in the fabric. So let's look at the fabric. I'm going to put a little splatter in there too, just to integrate those shapes with the other ones. And there's a little shadow and this pleat in the fabric that comes across. So I'm going to put just a little bit of the texture from the fabric as well, just as if there's some light little creases in there. We'll bring all of that through. I'll get a little splatter on it. And the last thing that I'm going to do is just take a little bit, going back a little bit to my orange color on the side of the orange here. Just a light second wash on here, just to give a little bit more form to the oranges. A last little bit on this one, although this is quite dark already on this side and it doesn't really need much. And a little bit of texture, and that's it. I hope you enjoyed watching me sketch these clementines in ink and watercolor. If you want to learn how to do it yourself, check out my online course, Sketching Markets in Ink and Watercolor. I'll leave a link for you in the description. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.